Hi there, thanks for tuning in. My name's Helen Bartlett. I'm a family photographer and a Canon ambassador. And today I'm going to be talking to you about photographing your families at home. So what's my background? I'm a family photographer based in London in the UK, and I run a business that specialises in photographing children on location. So in their own homes or at parks, woods, places that they like to go. My work takes me all over the UK and into Europe and sometimes beyond. It's a fantastic job. I absolutely love it. My style is natural pictures, mainly shot in a documentary fashion, just watching what's happening in front of me and reacting to what the children do. I would also take, of course, beautiful portraits and family group shots as well. All my work's in black and white, and that's a stylistic choice that I made when I started my business in 2003. I wanted to produce images that stand the test of time, that will sit happily with pictures from older generations and also with pictures yet to be taken. I'm privileged to have this opportunity to add a chapter to my clients' family stories, and many come back year after year to update their pictures and produce beautiful albums and wonderful frames for the wall. These are fantastic documents for the children to look back on in the future. So today I'm going to be sharing some of the things that I've learned over the last 17 years, things that I've learned from photographing these families. I'm going to share tips that will improve your family photography, whether you're a seasoned pro or whether you've just bought your first camera and are just taking your first steps in this wonderful, wonderful hobby. Because the fabulous thing about photography is it's a journey we take together. There's always new things to learn and new ways we can hone our skills to bring joy to ourselves and to those around us. So I'm going to talk first about portraits, about using window light indoors and using open shade outside. I'm going to explore how we can incorporate hobbies into these images to create stunning pictures that your clients and your families will love. Then we're going to look at storytelling in images, how to capture relationships, moods and emotions within our pictures. We're going to look at using the environment to add context to your pictures, so they'll be full of memories for the children when they grow up. So I'm hoping that you're going to find it interesting and get some really great ideas to incorporate into your own work. So let's get started with portraits. Now, taking beautiful portraits are one of the most rewarding things that we can do with our photography. Everyone loves a beautiful portrait of their loved ones, and everyone loves a beautiful portrait of themselves. It's a really lovely thing to have, and there's something so very special about recording how we looked at a particular moment in time. But there's also something even more fun, even better, about a portrait that really captures personality, that tells us something about the person as well as just what they look like. So what's the difference, we might think? To be honest, I believe it's all in the expression. A fake smile, a cheesy grin, we still see how a child looks, but it doesn't necessarily capture their personality. But a belly laugh, a natural smile, a wicked grin, or a quiet moment, it doesn't always have to be a smile. These can show us who they are as well as what they look like. These pictures can, in a fraction of a second, record their personality in images that will draw us in and stand the test of time. So how do we get these expressions? I know as well as anyone that pointing a camera at a child can often result in expressions that seem to bear no resemblance to what they normally look like. All teeth, they're sort of slightly crazy, cheesy grin. How do we get past those cheesy grins? The secret is communication. Talk to your subjects as you photograph them. Ask questions, tell jokes. Ensure their attention is on you or on what they're thinking about, anything but on what they should be doing with their face. Because I think we all probably know from our own experience, as soon as you try to smile, you tend to sort of not smile very naturally. But when someone asks us about our favourite place, our favourite person, our favourite game or hobby, then we smile naturally as we talk about it. I know that when I talk about photography, I light up, I love it. I want to share my love for this medium with you. It's the same when you ask kids about their favourite toy, or the best thing they love to do with their parents, or the games they play with their siblings. So try it and see. I'm sure you'll get really wonderful expressions. If you're photographing little ones, then it can actually be really helpful to have someone else to help you. You need to attract their attention to a spot behind your head, and you're not going to be having a discussion about quantum physics with a 6-month-old baby. A toy that makes a noise is fantastic, or someone to jump about and make them laugh. If it's just you, then balance something on your head. It always works for me because kids find it hilarious when whichever sort of soft toy I have on my head inevitably falls off. So that gets us expressions, but where do we take them? How do we light these portraits? So if we're inside, then we head to the window. Spend some time looking at the light in your home and seeing where it falls at different times of day. The room I'm filming in now has beautiful light in the mornings, but in the afternoon it gets very, very bright in here. It'd be really hard to shoot a portrait in here in the afternoon because the subject would be squinting. Conversely, in my front room, the light is absolutely lovely in the afternoon, but it's terrible first thing in the morning. So look around your house, see where the light is at different times of day. So once you've found a window that gives you good light at the time you want to work, then set yourself with your back to the window. Stand, sit or lie, I like to be roughly the same height as my subject, and face them towards you in the window. So the aim here is to have soft, even light on their faces. And you can take so many beautiful pictures from this setup. It's one that I use often, particularly with very little ones. Perhaps pop them on a bed and have them face towards the window for beautiful portraits. Then we can move and try different approaches. You can move around and shoot towards the window using the clear window light as the backdrop to your image. Place your subject in profile as well. You can get beautiful wraparound light that creates really dramatic portraits. There are lots of different options. Be aware that if you have your subject with their back completely towards the window, facing into the room towards you, that, unless you have a second light source, such as another window, a flash or an LED panel, then their face will now be in shadow, and at the very least you'll have to dial up your exposure to get really nice soft light on their faces. Windows are fantastic though, because you can really experiment without having to move too far. You can really see the effects of moving your subject around in relation to the light source. You might also want to see how it changes if you have your back to the window and your subject's in front of you and they're relatively close to you, compared to if you stay where you are and they move much further back into the room, because the light levels will drop off fairly rapidly. Now this can sound a bit confusing, particularly when you're just starting out, but I promise you, once you start to look, it will all make sense. And what can be helpful is if take one of your child's toys, a doll or a household object such as a plant, put it near the window, look at it from all sides. How does the light change? Then walk further into the room with your plant or your doll. How does it look there? Where in the room do you notice the changes in the light? You could look through your camera and note how the exposure changes, because that will give you a sort of numerical number and might be easier to sort of understand initially. But after a while, you'll start to see these changes in the light, and the more you see, the better your photography will get. A lot of learning can be done before we start taking pictures, and the more we've got our heads around these concepts, then the better our photography will be. So if we're outside, then the principles are the same. I want to find a soft, even light for my portraits, and I do this by placing my subject in the shade. If there's overhead shade, then that is fantastic. It mimics window light by creating a more directional light source. And if there isn't any shade, or isn't any overhead shade, then, anything will do. If I'm working in a garden, then often the options will be very limited. Certainly in London, we have to have very small gardens, and so a tiny patch of shade from a tree, a fence or a hedge, that might be all we have to work with. If shade is very limited, or if I have subjects who are likely to move around, toddlers, 3-year-olds, then I'll often sit them down. I find that anchoring them to one spot for a moment gives me a little bit of time to get myself in position. And also it often lets people relax more, rather than feeling like they're, standing stock still in front of the camera and getting very tense, like a sort of rabbit caught in the headlights. Because what I'm looking for is relaxed clients. Then I want to get catch lights in my subject's eyes. Those are the little reflected patches of lights which make eyes sparkle. And it's a great way to learn about lighting, is to look at the catch lights in pictures you see. Look in the newspaper, in magazines, on Instagram. Often you can see what the lighting source was, if it was the sky, a window, or an artificial light source. I then want to make sure that my subjects are comfortable. So as well as sitting them down, letting them relax, I want to ensure there are no harsh shadows on their faces, and I need to make sure that they're far enough into their shade that they won't be squinting. If it's a very bright day, you do need to be careful that your subject is comfortable, because if their sort of eyes are really sort of screwed up against the light, then that will obviously affect their expression in the portrait. So I'll move them back into the shade until they're happy. Now the other thing to look out for is flare, particularly if you're shooting in a small patch of shade. Flare happens when the light hits the lens and creates sort of blobby artefacts across the image, or a sort of white fog-like effect. Flare can be used for creative effects, and it often is in sort of films and Netflix and things, but it's hard to get right, and often, particularly in a headshot, just looks like a mistake. To combat flare, then use your lens hood, and also if you notice it through the viewfinder or when you're looking at your images on the back of the camera, then just move around a little to the left or the right, or take a step forward towards the shade. A little change of angle should be enough to get rid of it. But do move until it's gone. Get rid of it while you're taking the pictures, because it is an absolute nightmare to remove in Photoshop. So if I'm shooting portrait outdoors, I'll almost always use a wide aperture. I want to really blur the background. I love the effect of the beautiful bokeh, and the wider your aperture, the more pronounced these will be. So shoot at f2.8 or 1.8 if you're able to, or even 1.2 if your subject's standing still. I wouldn't advise shooting at 1.2 if your subject's moving around when you're just starting out, because it does take some practice. But shooting at those wide apertures is wonderful, and you'll be rewarded with a really beautiful result. So again, once we've taken pictures with very flat, even light on our subject, then move around them. Note how the light changes and how you get beautiful shadows on their faces, which can be really amazing to sort of bring out their features. So these are close-up portraits. What about portraits that have, a bit more going on? Images that incorporate hobbies into the shot? What about images that tell a story? So the first thing to think about is, why do we want to tell stories on our images? And the answer, I think, is because stories are where memories live. So much of our memory is visual. Pictures will transport us back to a place and a time. Sometimes I think it takes us back to the exact moment an image was made, but more often it seems to take us back to a feeling rather than a specific date. I have 2 pictures of myself as a child taken at our local park. I remember the day they were taken, or at least I think I do. My dad had just shown me how to ride a bike. He'd pushed me past the bandstand and I'd carried on pedalling, and I was going so fast, and then I realised that obviously he was no longer holding on to me, and then obviously I fell over. Now, in my mind, these pictures were taken on that day, but they might not have been, but they make me think of it. And then they also make me think of many other days cycling around the park, cycling around with my brothers and adventures we had, and they could have been taken on any one of these other days. Now, my point is the exact day doesn't matter. It's all about the feeling and about the memories that the picture brings forward. So when I photograph my clients, I don't expect them to think back to the day they spent with me, rather the summer they learnt to ride their bike, or their favourite games they play with their family at the park. Images transport us, and there's incredible power in this. What can be even more interesting about photography is that it also has the ability to transcend the individual and become universal, to talk to all of us. This picture of the 2 boys riding their bicycles, it will remind them of their summer holiday when I visited them for the day. But it also speaks to all of us. It speaks to me about childhood days, hot summers, adventures with friends and siblings. It's a very universal image, and I think as photographers we're incredibly lucky that we can create things like this that have such power. So have a think about what you want to remember about this time. What are the things that sum up your children at this moment? What are their interests? What are their little habits? All those little things that they do that they may grow out of as time passes. And talk to them. What do they want to record? What do they feel is really important? Because photography is a collaboration between subject and photographer, whether we've expressly asked for ideas or not. But it's great to get the kids involved, and particularly older ones. They really like to suggest things and often have fantastic ideas for pictures. Now, these picture ideas don't have to immediately seem photogenic and exciting, to have great merit. As family photographers, our world is not spectacular. We're not taking pictures in these sort of wonderful, exotic locations and environments, doing extreme sports. Our world is finding beauty in the everyday. And I know that personally, I have a huge sense of satisfaction in creating an interesting and unique image from a very normal day-to-day activity. So whether it's sport or music or craft that your child likes, whether they love computer games or Lego, or even just have a favourite spot to curl up with a book, look for ways to photograph them doing these things so they can look back on them in the future. So if we divide stories into 3 categories, we can sort of go from there and explore a bit further. So let's look first at relationships and connection. Then we'll look at mood and emotion, and finally at environment and the context in which the story takes place. I think great pictures tend to talk to us on at least one of these levels. I love to look at relationships between people in pictures. I like body language and expression, it's fascinating. We can see, we can feel these interactions, but how do we photograph them? So the best thing I think to do is get your subjects to play. If you're photographing your children together, what do they love to do best? You know, what games do they play? Do they like to jump on the bed or hide beneath the sheets? You know, you can photograph them doing that. If you're photographing your partner with your children or another family, then think about or ask what their favourite things are to do with the kids. You know, it might be they like to snuggle up on the sofa with a book or throw the kids in the air and laugh at the joy on their little faces. Parents always know what's guaranteed to make their children laugh. This is also a great idea when photographing grandparents, because I find grandparents can often be a bit nervous about being in front of the camera. They think it might be very sort of formal and staged, and they might feel very self-conscious. But once they realise we're photographing the things they normally do with their grandchildren, then they relax, and often they really love the sessions and absolutely love the pictures. And the best thing about doing these activities that everyone loves is that you can do them more than once. No one's going to complain about doing their favourite thing again and again. So there's time to work on your technique and make any tweaks to your composition or technique that you might need. You can also work to capture the in-between moments, because these can be hilarious. You know, this is one of my favourite pictures of me and my brother from our childhood. Here we are in the middle of the lake on a summer holiday, and of course it's raining, and we're both laughing in our canoes. And then you look closer, you realise that my brother has my oar and I'm sort of paddling with my hand, trying desperately to catch him up and to get him back. I've no idea how he got it, I can't remember, but it's so typical of our relationship. It captures so much about my childhood, especially, you know, rainy summer holidays. But you can see also, you can see this relationship again in other shots. You can see this sort of laughing love that we have between us as siblings. So look for moments like these. I can tell you from my own experience that these pictures will be absolutely priceless. Also, take time to get into some of these pictures yourself, particularly if you're photographing your own family. You know, set up your composition, put your camera on a tripod, balance it on a table or a pile of books and get into the shot. The Canon Connect app on our phones is amazing. You know, we can control our cameras from our phones, we can see a preview of the image, we can check focus and settings before we press the shutter. It's an absolute game changer for self-portraits, and it's a wonderful way to ensure that you appear in your own family album. Because most families have one member who's always behind the camera. In ours it was my dad, and now it's me. And, you know, they were in pictures less, but now we have the technology to counter that. Now we can make sure everyone is included in the story. And it's fun. You know, it's an incredibly fun way to be creative. So if this is relationship, then how about mood and emotion? What are we looking for there? Because our aim is to tell our children stories, to give them a document of their early life, then we can look to capture different emotions. You know, I love to photograph joy, laughter, happiness, and also the quiet moods of contemplation and concentration. Personally, I'm not quite so keen on photographing children crying or, you know, the grumpy sort of mood, just because I don't think I'd want to be photographed in that state myself, but it's a personal choice, and I know a lot of photographers and parents love a shot of a kind of hilariously grumping sort of 2-year-old. But there are so many different moods, there are so many opportunities. You can make yourself a list, think of all the emotions you might like to photograph, and then start to tick them off. I'm sure you'd find that happy and joy and laughter get ticked off so many times, and it's great, there's no limit on what we can do. But you might spend some more time looking for some of the others, exhausted or concentrating or wistful perhaps. These can take longer to find because they're less likely to be shots that you set up easily. You know, it's fun to have a list of pictures to look out for. I often do this at the beginning of the season. I sort of make myself a list of shots that I want to keep an eye out for, pictures that I want to try and take over the next 10, 20 or 30 shoots. Sometimes I don't see an opportunity, but I believe it makes me more receptive if I do spot something. Because I firmly believe that as photographers, we have a sort of mental filing cabinet of pictures and ideas in our brains. We have this idea of pictures we've taken or tried to take that failed, and we want to try them again. We've got images we've seen in books or galleries or Instagram, stills from films or Netflix. There are so many sources of visual inspiration out there. And all these ideas are filed away in our heads. And then, sometimes we're presented with an opportunity. We can pull them from our memory bank and think, oh yes, I'll try something like that today. I'll make it my own and I'll create something new. Sometimes we might have an opportunity a week after we saw the image that inspired us. Sometimes it won't happen for years, but it does happen. It's a fascinating process. So make lists, moods, types of shots. Perhaps this year you want to take a great picture with shadows or reflections. Maybe you want to take a picture from a high angle or using a technique such as panning. Have a think, make a list, and then refer back to it occasionally to see how you're getting on. I promise you, it will make you more experimental. It'll make you take more interesting pictures. So for example, this picture was taken when I was testing the EOS R before its launch a few years ago. I really wanted to take a shot that captured a feeling of quiet intimacy, of bedtime, a sort of family moment. I wanted something graphic and interesting that would draw the viewer in. I loved the idea of reading by torchlight because I remember doing that so much as a child. It was such a part of growing up. So on this shoot, which was a full day session, we took pictures at bedtime. The lights were out, the story was read, the girls were snuggling down with their books. I shot at f1.2 at a 60th at ISO 400, and I utilised the electronic viewfinder on the EOS R to help me get the perfect exposure. Because these contrasty low light shots with dark shadows and then bright highlights, they can be quite difficult. But being able to see what you're doing and adjust the exposure accordingly with the what you see is what you get electronic viewfinder, I think it's one of the absolute advantages and huge leaps forward of working with a mirrorless system. Quiet shots can also be a moment within a moment, something fleeting. It's the mood of the picture rather than the activity that decides our emotional response. So here the little girl had blown on a dandelion, but instead of that moment of action, the shot as she blows and the seeds begin to sort of disperse in front of her, which is obviously a shot that I love to take, this is a picture taken fractionally afterwards. This moment of perfect stillness as she looks absolutely transfixed at this seed dancing in the summer air. I love how sometimes a quiet shot can appear in the middle of a moving set of images. Here I would have used the motor drive to take a number of pictures through the moment and then selected my favourites afterwards. This can be a really great way to take pictures in moments where there's lots going on. There's a reason that sports photographers just love a high frame rate. So I found that shooting a burst of images when I know that something's going to happen, I sort of set up my sort of composition and then take a number of pictures. This really increases my chances of striking gold. So with any picture, quiet moments and moments of high excitement, then background is important. A fantastic moment with bad lighting and a messy, distracting background is never going to be as impactful as one where everything's been thought through. For some shots, like this one of the girl and the dandelion, then what we want in the background is simplicity, a background that doesn't distract, that we don't really notice, so that all our attention is on the moment in the image. But for other pictures, it's really important to include the background, to include the context. The image I showed you earlier from my childhood of me standing on the bandstand. Now, there the context is so important. It tells me where I was, Greenwich Park in London. It anchors me to a place in my childhood. So giving our photographs context can be hugely important. It gives them longevity and it helps attach memories to the images. Pictures taken in our homes, in our favourite places, they'll make us think outside the image itself. Location aids memory. So look around you. How can you frame your image to include more of the environment? How do you do that while keeping your images coherent? Can you use framing to incorporate an element of interior design or a piece of furniture into your picture? Can you pull back to show the setting more? Think about it when you're indoors as well as when you're out and about, because the more you think about it, the more instinctive it will become and your photography will become much more interesting. To then ensure you put these tips into practice, keep your camera to hand. Our equipment is precious, it's expensive, and so of course the temptation is to keep it safely packed in a bag, but then sometimes it never gets used. So I suggest you find a shelf, obviously out of reach of your kids, but somewhere close and keep it to hand. Keep it in the living room or the kitchen, somewhere you can grab it quickly when you see a moment. Take your camera with you when you go to the park. Once you've got in the habit of sort of slinging your camera over your shoulder when you leave the house, you'll find you take many more pictures and your photography will really begin to improve in leaps and bounds. I try to always carry a camera of some sort, whether it's my 1DX Mark II, my slightly smaller EOS R, or my little compact G7X Mark III. Sometimes I'll carry a camera around with me for weeks and not use it, and I'll start to think that I'm making a really terrible decision carrying all this weight. But then when I see something and I have it there to take an image, then I know I'm making the right decision. It's a great habit to get into, and it opens up a world of new possibilities. And then once you've taken these pictures, then print them. We're all guilty of hard drives stuffed with images we've never printed, and those images get forgotten. I bet none of us go through our images on our phones very often. The gems are lost within the sort of forest of bad snaps of our supper. You know, we all have bad snaps on our phones. But make sure you process your best images, keep them somewhere safe, back them up and print them. It doesn't have to be expensive prints in beautiful frames, although of course those are wonderful. But cheap prints and take them to the fridge. My fridge is covered in photographs and I change them often. I look at them every day. I think it's a really wonderful way to display images. You could also make a book. There are lots of amazing opportunities for printing now, and a book a year, or a book that records a holiday, or even one that just records this weird time we're living through. It's going to be a really lovely and interesting thing to have and to look back on in the future. So have fun with it. Photography is an amazing hobby and it's one that's hugely valuable whatever our skill level. I'm hoping this video has given you some new ideas. Do connect up with me on Instagram. I'm Helen Bartlett Photography, or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Feel free to ask questions and I'll keep an eye on any comments here too. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts and help with any questions you have. Do let me know how you're getting on. You know, I'm really looking forward to us all travelling on this photography journey together. So thanks so very much for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed it and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.